Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Smita Sahu, and I welcome you all to today's book discussion session on one of my favorite books, The Palace of Illusion by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. The first time I read this book was back in 2009 or 10. It was strongly recommended to me by a family member. And I remember thinking, why read another story on the Mahabharata? You know, we've all grown up listening to the tales of Mahabharata and Ramayana from our parents, grandparents. We watched the series on television, read about these epics in the books. And so it was that very reluctantly, I picked up this book to read. And I'm so glad I did, because this book was a revelation. The unique perspective that Chitra Banerjee brings to this book made me question some long-held assumptions. Never before had I imagined the Mahabharata from Draupadi's perspective. By making Draupadi the narrator of this book and letting us reimagine the events of this great epic, Chitra Banerjee transforms the way we look at this very familiar tale. I mean, how often does it happen that you hear the voice of a woman narrating a tale which for centuries has been told by men? I recently picked up this book again, of course, to prepare for this session, and I found the book as captivating as it was the first time round. In today's session, my intention is not to talk about the story of this book, because I want you to read the book and enjoy it for yourselves. But I will talk about what makes this book such a compelling read, and more importantly, why is this story still relevant to us after so many years? Yes, let's get started right away. And before I ask you, I delve into this, the discussion of this book, I want to ask you, when you think of this grand epic, the Mahabharata, what is it that you're reminded of? What is it that first comes to your mind? You can probably just write your responses in the chat box, and we can I can just read out a couple of them. What is it? Could be any character, it could be an event, it could be a story, something that reminds you, when you hear of this term, the Mahabharata, what are you reminded of? Anything? Arjun, okay. All the teachings of Lord Krishna. What else? It's more of a test for you to see how much you know about the Mahabharata. Moral values, okay. Hastinapur. Okay. Now I was reading the response. Aditya wrote Arjun. So I was reading that response. The plight of Draupadi, okay, yes. The court scene, family politics, good. What else? Okay, yes. So yes, you're right. The Mahabharata is all of this and much, much more. And this book, it's not just a retelling of these events. Rather, it's a reimagining of a timeless epic. It gives voice to a woman who was always central to the text, yet rarely heard. And this book makes you relook at these historical and mythological events with a new lens. A lens that's colored by a feminist perspective, a lens that makes you introspect and reflect. The book that it takes up, whether it's power, patriarchy, the search for identity, war, these are timeless themes and they echo our present realities. The book transforms historical, mythological aspects, when we look at these mythological figures, these larger than life figures, whether it's Dronacharya, Bhim, Pitama, Arjun, it transforms these larger than life figures into deeply human characters, which makes the Mahabharata more relatable and emotionally engaging for the modern reader. So without further ado, let's begin with the discussion. And we'll begin with a little background information about the author first. Like I said, the book was written by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, who's an Indian-American writer, activist, poet, and currently she's a professor of creative writing at the University of Houston in America. She's known for retelling of mythologies and epics from a feminist perspective. So if you look at the Palace of Illusions, this is the story of Mahabharata, which is narrated to us from Draupadi's point of view. Similarly, we have another book, The Forest of Enchantments, which was published in 2019. And this is the story of Ramayana from Sita's point. Several of our other works, popular works include Arranged Marriage, of short stories. We have The Mistress of Spices, The Last Queen, her latest work, Independence. And one common thread that runs through all these books is the fact that she gives voice to women who have been silenced by tradition all these years. Her women are complex individuals. They are strong, yet vulnerable. They are simple, magical. And they experience a range of emotions from loss, longing, love, desire, tangled marriages, divorces, childbirth, and so on. Her works have been published in more than 100 magazines and anthologies. She's the recipient of several awards. Her name was included in 2015 in the Economic Times 20 Most Influential Global Indian Women. Her works have been translated into almost 29 languages, including languages like Dutch, Hebrew, Japanese, Bengali, Hungarian. Her works, some of her works have been adapted to the stage. They have been made in movies. So all in all, she has an impressive graph. Talking about the genesis of this particular book, Chitra Banerjee, I don't know if I mentioned, the book was published in 2008. But the seed for this book was sown almost 15 years back. She decided to take up this humongous task of retelling the Mahabharata in her own words. And when she shared this thought with her friends and family members, she was warned by them of the conceivable dangers of undertaking such a humongous project. She was told that, what if you mess it up? It's a sacred text. You are bound to offend a lot of people. They will come after you, and so on and so forth. In fact, there's a very interesting anecdote that is mentioned in the author's note in this book, wherein she says the very first week when she started writing the book, lightning struck her house. And, it caused considerable damage. And immediately, her well-wishers, they got up and they said that, see, it's a warning from the gods. They don't want you to write this book. And even her husband, who's been a staunch supporter of her writing career, even he advised her to postpone the writing of this book, this project, for a while. But like our narrator of this book, Draupadi, Chitra Banerjee was headstrong. She was determined that she has to go ahead with this project. And so she began her research. Now, as she researched and read the text of Mahabharata, the more she read about it, the more disappointed she became with the way women were represented in this text. So I'll just read a little portion from the author's note to tell you, what her reaction was when she read the original text of the Mahabharata. But as I pored over the thick leather-bound Mahabharata in my parents' home in Kolkata, I grew increasingly dissatisfied with the portrayals of women in the epic. The numerous, powerful, and complex women that affect the action in major ways. For instance, there's the widowed Kunti, mother of the Pandavas, who dedicates her life to making sure her sons become kings. There's Gandhari, mother of Duryodhan and his brothers, who blindfolds herself at marriage because her husband is sightless. And most of all, there is Panchali, or Draupadi, who has the unique distinction of being married to 5 men, the 5 Pandav brothers, the greatest warriors of their time, and who, some might argue, by her headstrong actions, helps to bring about the destruction of the third age of man. But somehow all these women remain shadowy figures, their thoughts and motives mysterious, their emotions described only when they affected the lives of the male heroes, their roles ultimately subservient to those of their fathers, husbands, brothers, or sons. So like I said, she was greatly disappointed with the way women were portrayed in the epic. And that is when she decided to recreate the story and place a woman at the forefront. And right from the beginning, she knew who this woman was going to be. Draupadi, or as she's also known as Panchali. The book was successful beyond her expectations. She was appreciated for her unique perspective that she brought to her book, the strong female protagonist, and the feminist themes that she explored in this novel. So that's basically about as far as the genesis and of the book is concerned and the background about the author is concerned. Coming now to the book. Now, I don't know how many of you have read the book and how many, I know a couple of you are in, you've picked up the book and you have started reading it. And some of you may, I hope after this session will, take up this book and read this book. But I think you must have gathered by now that the backdrop of this book is the Mahabharata, and Draupadi is the narrator, and all the events that we view hereon are through her eyes. So the book traces Draupadi's journey from her miraculous birth from fire, her childhood dreams, her marriage to the 5 Pandav brothers, the battle of Kurukshetra, and finally her death. Her journey is one which is marked with resilience, rebellion, and reflection. Born of fire, destined for greatness, Panchali grows up in a patriarchal household where her intelligence, her ambition, and her inner strength set her apart from the other women. So right from the beginning, when you see from the very first chapter, she comes across as this fiery, complex, impatient, and often misunderstood person. So again, I'm going to read a small extract. This is to do with the birth of Panchali. And this is again a very powerful piece, very important scene in the book, because it tells us a lot about Draupadi and about the events. It kind of hints at the events that are going to happen. And strange enough, although I have read about the Mahabharata, before I read this book, I wasn't really aware of the fact that she was born of the fire. And there was a prophecy at her birth. So I'll just read the small portion. So this is Daima, who's her caretaker, who's telling her the story. So just a little background, Draupadi is the daughter of King Draupadi. And King Draupadi is holding this yagna, this puja, because he wants a son. Why does he need a son? Because he needs, he wants to take revenge against this one character. I won't tell you who the character is. I want you to read the book. And for that, he needs this son. And this puja is held, and finally the son comes out of the fire. But there is another surprise element that comes following the brother, following this boy. And that's this portion. I'll just read this. Daima is telling Draupadi, even before we had finished cheering and clapping, even before your father had a chance to greet your brother, you appeared. You were as dark as he was fair, as hasty as he was calm. Coughing from the smoke, tripping over the hem of your sari, grabbing for his hand and almost sending him tumbling too. Somehow you managed to hold each other up. And then the voices came again. They said, behold, we give you this girl, a gift beyond what you asked for. Take good care of her, for she will change the course of history. Now, this is a very important scene in the book. It's there right in the first chapter, and it tells us a lot of things about Draupadi, her character, traits, certain aspects of her personality. The very first thing, it says that she was not expected. She stumbled out of the fire. So she's the twin sister of her brother. I mean, they're twins. So we have Drishtadyumna, who's the son, and we have Draupadi, who's his twin sister. And one, she's born of dark complexion, something which she's very conscious of. So right at the beginning, we are told, when she has this conversation, I'll read that extract also. When she's having this conversation with Lord Krishna, she's very conscious of the fact that being born in a royal household, being a princess, she's born of this dark skin, and something which resonates with us, with a lot of women today itself also. Skin color is a big thing. So yes, she's born of dark complexion. Second aspect of her personality that is brought forward is the fact that she's impatient. She's hasty as her brother is calm. And that is something which triggers a lot of events in the book. So that is one aspect of her personality that we're introduced to. Third, her bond that she shares, the bond she shares with her twin brother, Drishtadyumna. They hold on to each other. And we witness this bond throughout the novel, how they look out for each other, support each other. And in the process, it kind of threatens their whole existence also. And finally, the prophecy that is made at her birth, that she is going to change the course of history, which kind of makes you think, Draupadi is one person who's been held responsible for the Battle of Kurukshetra, and to a certain degree, maybe she was. But then the prophecy that was made, it makes you reflect on the fact that was this all predestined? Was it meant to happen? And during the course of the novel, there are two conversations. One is with Dronacharya and one is with Krishna that Panchali has, where we kind of get that inkling that, yes, this was all meant to happen, and Panchali simply nudged the events in that direction. So in that sense, this passage is quite important. As far as the language is concerned, the tone that Chitra Banerjee uses in the novel, it's bold, it's poetic, yet introspective. So there are a lot of passages in the book that you will find which resonate strongly with you, and especially the conversations that take place between Panchali and Lord Krishna. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware, but they shared a special bond. They were not related, but they were very good friends. And somehow, probably because she was dark-skinned and Lord Krishna is also, this is one, inkling, she felt that maybe she shares that bond because he's also of dark skin. That's what she mentions in the book. So she shares a special bond. And whenever she's in any kind of a turmoil or dilemma, or, she's upset about something, or she's in a crisis, it is Krishna she turns to, whether physically in person or in her mind. I mean, so much so even at her deathbed, she can't settle her mind on anyone. And finally, when she thinks of Krishna, she's at peace and everything becomes, the whole purpose of her life becomes clear. So the book is interspersed with these small snippets of conversation between Krishna and Panchali. These are conversations which are profound, meaningful, and they resonate with readers across generations. It's not just the traditional readers, the older generation, but even you or people across cultures. They will also identify with these little nuggets of these little pearls of wisdom. So I'm going to read two passages here. Of course, there are, like I said, the book is interspersed with these conversations, but I'm just going to read two which really resonated with me and which I found thought-provoking. So there's one which is basically, again, right at the beginning. And like I said, she was born of dark complexion and she was very conscious of this fact. So this conversation she has with Krishna, it is basically based on that. And it's deeply philosophical, what Krishna replies to her. So it's deeply philosophical, yet it seems profoundly personal and something which offers timeless wisdom and something which resonates with the readers even today in the world that we live in. So the passage is, she's talking to Krishna and Panchali says, when I was 14, I gathered up enough courage to ask Krishna if he thought that a princess afflicted with a skin so dark that people termed it blue was capable of changing history. He smiled. That was how he often answered my questions, with an enigmatic smile that forced me to do my own thinking. But this time, he must have sensed my confused distress, for he added a few words. And this is important. A problem becomes a problem only if you believe it to be so. And often, others see you as you see yourself. Now, this is one of the most memorable and powerful quotes from the book, and one of my favorites. And it reminds us of two things. One is, of course, the way you approach a situation. When you're faced with any kind of challenge or problem in your life, your perception towards that problem determines your response towards it. I mean, it's so profound and it's so meaningful. Such a simple statement, but yes, it carries a lot of depth in it. And the second thing is what he says over here, often others see you as you see yourself. So this statement reminds us of the power of perception. People are so conscious of the way, especially in today's world, when we are so much, taken up by technology, social media, we're putting our pictures over there, and we are so affected by the way people perceive us, the way they view us. So our perception is not based on who we are or what we are, but more on the way people, what they think of us. And this is what Krishna says over here, that often others see you as you see yourself. So again, these little pearls of wisdom, these little nuggets of wisdom that are there in the book, they are very meaningful, very philosophical, and like I said, profoundly personal as well. There's another one which I will just read out, which is basically from the court scene. And I think one of you mentioned also, the court scene. I think we're all familiar with one of the most iconic and the most intense scenes in Mahabharata as well as in this book, where Draupadi is dragged to the court by Dushasan. Her husbands have lost her in this bet, in this game of dice. And now she's dragged to the court in front of hundreds of men and humiliated in front of the entire court. And not one man stands up to help her, not her husbands, in fact, she had 5 husbands, so not her husbands, not Bhishma Pitama, who she treats as a grandfather, not the king, not anybody else, not one man. So here, now, this is the thought in Draupadi's mind. She says, then maybe because there was no one else who could help, I thought of Krishna. He owed me nothing. We were not related. Perhaps that way I could fix my mind on him without being swept away by the anger that arises from expectation. I thought of his smile, the way it would appear on his face for no reason. The sounds of the courtroom faded, the Shasan's grunts, the whispers of the watchers. Suddenly, I was in a garden. There were swans in the lake, a tree that arched above, the sound of water falling as though the world had no end. The wind smelled of sandalwood. Krishna sat beside me on a cool stone bench. His glance was bright and tender, and he says, no one can shame you if you don't allow it. Again, very simple statement. No one can shame you if you don't allow it. But again, very, very meaningful. It's a powerful reminder of personal agency, dignity, and self-respect. And again, the world where we inhabit, where we live, the world which we inhabit, where we are constantly subjected statement is a call to reclaim your inner strength and autonomy. So we see throughout the book, there are these simple statements, these one-liners which Krishna says. Of course, these are not the exact quotations which are there in the Bhagavad Gita or in the Mahabharata, in the text of Mahabharata, but these are simplified statements, and that is why you can relate to them more. I don't know how many of you are actually going to read the Bhagavad Gita or the original text of Mahabharata. So that's why it's a good idea to read this book, and a lot of these instances, these conversations, they would resonate. And these are just 2 examples. The book is filled with them. Moving on to another important aspect that the book takes up. Of course, these were conversations between Panchali and Krishna. This particular instance, the courtroom scene, also is very important in the sense that it brings out, it's a turning point in the novel. One, of course, the passage that I'll read now after this, it reflects Draupadi's silent rage, her inner turmoil, her helplessness, because nobody comes up to help her. And when everything is over, Krishna has, of course, saved her in whatever way he could. So this chapter, which talks about her humiliation and which reflects her silent rage, her restrained rage, is powerful and it's heartbreaking. It's powerful because this is the first time that Draupadi realizes the truth of her position, both as a woman and as a queen. She realizes for the first time that she's vulnerable, she's dispensable, and she's viewed as a property. And at this moment, the whole grandeur of power, prestige, and marriage dissolves. It just crumbles. She, the passage that I'm going to read, it reflects on Draupadi's disillusionment of her husbands, her disillusionment with dharma, and the entire societal system that she once believed in. So I'll just read and then I'll just take it up from there. This is after, she has been humiliated in the court. What did I learn that day in the Sabha? All this time, I had believed in my power over my husbands. I had believed that because they loved me, they would do anything for me. But now I saw that though they did love me as much perhaps as any man could, there were other things they loved more. Their notions of honor, of loyalty towards each other, of reputation were more important to them than my suffering. They would avenge me later, yes, but only when they felt the circumstances would bring them heroic fame. A woman doesn't think that way. I would have thrown myself forward to save them if it had been in my power that day. I wouldn't have cared what anyone thought. The choice they made in that moment of my need changed something in our relationship. I no longer depended on them so completely in the future. And when I took care to guard myself from hurt, it was as much from them as from our enemies. Now, this passage marks the shift in Draupadi and her outlook towards life. Moving on from the initial shock and humiliation to anger and resistance, this passage, this paragraph, it signals an awakening of an inner fire, where she begins to question the foundation of the world she lives in. So it's a very pivotal moment in the narrative. In a sense, her personal injustice becomes symbolic of a greater wrong, and a few in the novel later on. So these are some of the intense passages or powerful or poignant passages from the book. There are certain themes which have been taken up in the book as well, which resonate with us, which are very relevant in the contemporary society. So I'll just touch upon one or two themes. One is, of course, and why they're relevant is because, the world we live in, there's a lot of intolerance. There are power struggles. There are wars. What's happening with Ukraine, Russia, Gaza, Hamas. In fact, what recently happened in Pahalgam also. So in such a scenario, the events that have been discussed here become very relevant with what is happening around us in the world. So the very first theme that has been taken up over here is that of the futility and cost of war. Now, there is this moment in the book, post the Battle of Kurukshetra, when the Pandavas have won, the Kauravas have lost, and now the Pandavas, along with Draupadi, they are on the battlefield of the Kurukshetra, and they're just taking stock of the situation, trying to identify the kith and kin that they have lost. And Draupadi says, yes, we have won, but at what cost? Now, this becomes important because, all this time, she was driven by rage, this feeling of humiliation, anger, and a desire for revenge. And finally, when she's got her revenge, she realizes that at what cost? No matter how just the cause was, in the end, war only brings destruction and devastation. So this slide is again relevant in the current climate. Okay, the theme is basically, somebody asked to repeat the theme. If the war is for a just cause, at the end, it doesn't matter which side was right, which side was wrong, because what is left is a trail of destruction. So when she's standing in the battlefield and Draupadi looks around, all she can see is a sea of women in white, widowed women, orphaned children, mutilated bodies. That's all she can see around her. And that is when it hits her, that we may have won, but at what cost? So this realization is also relevant in the current climate of geopolitical and civil wars. Like I said, what's happening with Russia, Ukraine, Hamas, Gaza, these wars just continue to devastate lives. Another theme that's been taken up over here is that of ego and this lust for power. And this theme is explored through the actions and decisions of a lot of key characters in the novel. In fact, most of them, whether it's the Kauravas, the Pandavas, whether it's Draupadi, it's Karn, or even King Drupad, the minor characters. So we will see that this whole theme of ego, like for instance, like the Palace of Illusion, in the literal sense, this refers to the Maya Mahal, which the Pandavas and Draupadi lived in, right? I don't know if you are familiar with the story. They built this huge palace where everything, it was magical. In the sense, the doors were so transparent that people would walk through, and it was glass, basically made of glass, and they would just walk through. Or you would feel there are streams flowing, but actually it was just the floor. So it was an illusional palace. And when Kauravas come to visit, when Duryodhan comes to visit this palace, he slips, thinking it's a stream. He tries to jump, or it's probably the floor, and he tries to jump and he falls into a pool of water. Something like that happens. And in the book, it says these and Draupadi doesn't check them. She could have checked them. She could have apologized to Duryodhan, but she doesn't. Her ego comes in the way, and she just lets it pass. Maybe it could have mitigated the situation. On his part, Duryodhan, his ego is so deeply wounded that it fuels his desire for revenge. And ultimately, it leads to that scene in the court, Draupadi's humiliation in court because he wants, he's so filled with ego. And throughout the novel, we see, he's the story of Mahabharata, it is his lust for power, his hunger for control, for power, for the throne. You must have heard he said he refuses to give them land even of the size of a pin. Sui ke barabar zameen bhi nahi dunga, he says. So that's the kind of, uh, you know, the kind of control he wants, and this lust for power, and which we can identify with, today also, with rising authoritarianism, polarized politics, and fragile egos, that our leaders have today. This theme, it throws light on how your ego and this hunger for power, unchecked power, unbridled power, can destroy communities and countries. So in a way, the novel offers timeless lessons on these aspects, and it's a world. That's why I said, this story, it may have taken place thousands of years back ago, but it still resonates with us at the present time. Another theme, in a minor sense, I'll just take this up, is that of shared suffering. So, there's at one point in the novel, Draupadi says that pain, I've learned, is not a solitary experience. It seeks communion. It demands to be shared. Again, we see that what it basically means is this pain is not meant to be borne alone. It reaches out for connection. And we see that Draupadi is not alone in her pain. Her pain mirrors the sufferings of others, whether it's Kunti's silence, or it's Kan's rejection by his family as well as the society, or the Pandavs' exiles. It's like a collective burden, and it shows how suffering binds people together. And it again resonates strongly with the global reality, a world that is marked by war, mental health struggles, refugee displacements as a result of the wars that are happening, climate change, or this line, that pain seeks communion. It affirms our interconnectedness. And in fact, it is something that, we need to think about, to create spaces of compassion, to nurture empathy, and a feeling of communion, a shared pain, because again, what's happening around us, you see that people have become apathetic, they have become insensitive and indifferent to what is happening around them. So, how you need to reach out, you need to listen to others, you need to create spaces of compassion. So this is, in a nutshell, what, the background to the book, and what are the major themes that have been taken up in this book by Chitra Banerjee. Once you read the book, you will come across several more aspects as well. Now, coming to the part, what makes this novel such a compelling read, and why should you read the book? I don't know how many of you have read the book? Okay, Aditi, you've read the book. Okay, so I'll take your opinions and your feedbacks towards, once we finish with this. And yeah, so for those of you who haven't, you'll think that why read? I know about the book, and, but I think you must, this is something you should take up, and I promise you won't regret, you will enjoy reading this book. What makes this book so compelling is, and what, why this book continues to resonate with readers across generations and across cultures. Like I said, the book has been translated into a lot of languages. I don't know this particular book, but a lot of Chitra Banerjee's books have been translated into a number of languages. So I'm sure it resonates with readers across cultures as well. So one, of course, it offers a fresh perspective. I mean, like I said, at least I had never imagined the Mahabharata from Draupadi's perspective before. So this was something very unique. Rarely do you hear, although she was a central character in the text, but her voice was rarely heard. So this book offers a fresh perspective, and it challenges the way we think about this epic. It's the bold, imaginative telling epic. You look at it from a different perspective, a perspective that you may have rarely encountered. Then in terms of the themes that have been taken up in the book, these are timeless themes, whether it's search for identity, whether it's the emotion of love, betrayal, desire, anger, jealousy, vengeance. These are, even though this text is thousands of years old, Draupadi's dilemmas, they, regarding her identity, regarding her autonomy, they still resonate with the women. They mirror the questions many women ask even today. So that, for that reason, also, this whole epic becomes timeless. Then the feminine experience that the book takes up and the perspective that Chitra Banerjee explores over here, it resonates across cultures. So Panchali's challenges become, they are a reflection of our challenges. So, even today, women are, in a lot of societies, women are expected to be dutiful daughters, loyal wives, sacrificial mothers. So just like in the book, Panchali pushes back against all these expectations. Women today are also doing the same. So you kind of resonate with these aspects of the book. The language, like I said, it's simple, it's timeless. It's a simple language, it's poetic, accessible, and it's a timeless story. And it's told in a way that engages the reader. Like I said, I don't know how many of you are going to actually pick up the original text of Mahabharata or read the Bhagavad Gita for that matter. But this book kind of takes you back on that journey in a very engaging manner. Also, the last point, that this book is a perfect balance of tradition and boldness, of you could say reverence and rebellion. So it doesn't try to rewrite the Mahabharata as a new story. I mean, what you read is what you know. These are the events that happened in history, so it's nothing new. She's not trying to create a new story out of this. What she does is simply offers it a fresh perspective and adds multiple layers of meaning to it, feelings of feelings, emotions, internal conflict. So it adds greater depth to the text. It makes you reflect. It makes you introspect. It makes you question a lot of aspects, a lot of things that you had just accepted for so many years. The balance between reverence and rebellion, feeling well the book is about. Of course, there's another intriguing factor which I had not heard of before, which I think I won't really mention. Some of you who have read it would know, is the fact that we always knew that during the Swayamvar, it is the Pandavas, it is Arjun basically who enters the Swayamvar, and it is she who, he who she chooses. But there is another aspect, that there was another man. Of course, we know about this. There was another man who was there in the Swayamvar, who could fulfill the challenge, who was competent and knew about this. We don't know how much that is true, but yes, it does throw a new angle to it. Because even in the courtroom, when there's nobody who stands up to help her, she does look at Karn, because he's the only person who can stop Duryodhan. And because he's fueled by his own ego, his own humiliation, his own rejection at the hands of Draupadi, he does not get up to help her. So that's another angle to the story, which is quite interesting and a new angle. So that's there. So in the end, I would just like to say that even if you think you know the Mahabharata, even if you know the Mahabharata, this story will feel new. So please do read the book, and I promise you won't regret it. So now I think we can just be open for any kind of questions that you may have, or any kind of inputs for those of you who've read the book or are in the process of reading the book. Anything that you would like to share, or you would like to say, or comment on any part. My voice is cracking. Is it still cracking? Sorry, I missed that part. So, okay, I'll just read some of the things that, okay, so Aditya writes, this book gives agency to Draupadi's character. However, if you're a purist about mythology, the book may frustrate you with the liberties it takes, especially the romantic angle with Karn, which isn't in the original epic. So yeah, like I said, Aditya, it's not in the original epic, but it does intrigue, it does kind of make you think. Yes, as a purist, as a person who's a staunch believer of what's written in, but again, how much of it is true? Like we say, the text is part history, part mythology. We have just accepted what has been handed down to us. So yes, there were two people in that Swayamvar who could fulfill the challenge. One was Arjun, one was Karn. And Draupadi could have selected anybody. It was up to her, but she didn't really have a choice, because if you've read the original one also, it is Lord Krishna who hints out to her, to choose Arjun rather than Karn. So the scales could have tilted any which way, but it is Krishna who nudges her towards Arjun. And because she believes in him so much, she trusts him so much, she just accepts, she just agrees with she just goes with that choice. So that is there. Also, the book mentions this angle that, there is when Karna is stopped to compete, when he is challenged that he can't compete because he is not of royal ancestry. Drishtadyumna, Draupadi's brother, he stands up and sensing the situation, because Draupadi feels that Karna is definitely a stronger warrior, and Drishtadyumna doesn't stand a chance in front of him. She stands before him and she insults Karna, because she felt that that's the only way Karna would back off, because if he tells him that I can't marry a charioteer's son. So yes, there is a certain ambiguity. We don't know how much of it is true. And but then it does kind of create a certain amount of intrigue and interest. It does throw a new angle to the story. So that's there. Anything else? So we have Sanskriti. I'd missed your thing earlier. You said that I personally never read literature related to the Mahabharata, so this would count as my first. Before this, it had only been the numerous references and small anecdotes that my family and elders would say out loud mindlessly, thinking it was obvious information that needed no necessary explanation. It has drawn parallels to our current state of the world in a very simple and powerful way, which I believe is extremely crucial as we grow increasingly apart from the values that have been our foundation and that keep us tethered. Yes, absolutely true, Sanskriti. And like I said, for those of you who have not heard about the Mahabharata or have not, when we were growing up, I don't know whether all of you have seen that or not, when we were children, so we would be glued to our television sets. Every Sunday there would be this hour-long episode of Mahabharata, and I think even Ramayana. We had the series of Ramayana as well, and we would be glued to our television. The entire family, whether it was the grandparents, parents, us, even as children, we were like really small at that time, and a lot of the Mahabharata that we know about is from those of you who've not read or heard about the Mahabharata in much detail, you must read this book, because in a very, very simple and engaging manner, Chitra Banerjee has narrated. So certain events, yes, they have been discussed in details. There are certain events where the entire chapter is devoted to it, whereas the others have just been compressed to a paragraph, because it's a huge, it's a huge epic text. And this is a compressed version of that epic, of that grand epic that we have. So yes. Okay, so Anag writes, ma'am, I have not read the book yet, but does it concentrate more on the epic Mahabharata or the fact how women were treated then compared to... So no, it's not about how women were treated, Anag. It's not about how women were treated. It's basically the story of the Mahabharata. It is exactly the story, what it is. It's a retelling of Mahabharata. But like I said, it's not just a retelling, it's a reimagining, because now we are listening to the Mahabharata from Draupadi's point of view, from her perspective. It's like she's the narrator. So her inner turmoil, her thoughts, her outlook on things are what are presented in the book. So it's not that how women were treated then or how women are treated now. It is basically a feminist perspective, so till now, what you have seen is how Ved Vyas wrote the epic and what is handed down. So basically, the male voice is what you have heard so far. But for the first time, you hear a female voice narrating the story. So that is how it's different. Aditya writes, I personally think that both Mahabharata and Ramayana are more or less reflections of the patriarchal society which exists even today. Yes, It is. And like I said, that is why the text will resonate. A lot of things that things are changing, the society is changing, but we have a long way to go. So a lot of things, for example, like we talked about the skin color. So she was born into a royal household, and even as a, we don't know how much of that is true, but then she was smothered with all these skin lightening concoctions at home because she was going to be a queen. I'm very conscious of that. In that conversation I read she has with Lord Krishna. So today, skin color, the boys are born with a dark skin, it's okay. But ladki kali nahi honi chahiye, So that kind of a mindset, small minor things, they still exist. So of course, it echoes, that's why I said these are timeless themes of the search for identity, autonomy, love, and the patriarchal society, which is gradually changing, but like I said, we still have a long way to go. Okay, so Anand writes, ma'am, was Draupadi only the primary reason for cause of Kurukshetra war? No, not really. She was one of the reasons. She, like I said, she has been held responsible. History blames her for the Battle of Kurukshetra. But was it Draupadi who put everything at stake? She was humiliated in front of an entire court. Did she ask the husbands to bet her in that game of dice? Her 5 husbands, in fact, primarily it was Yudhishthir. He bet his own brothers, he bet his entire kingdom, his palace, his wealth, everything. And in the end, he put even his wife at stake. That wasn't her fault. And that's why we say, before that, everything that she believed in just crumbled, that illusional world that she was living in. It just crumbled because before that, she had not really thought that this could happen. So the very foundation of what she believed in just, it kind of collapsed that day. So she was put at stake without her knowledge, without her wish. And when she was dragged to the court, the Shasan drags her, pulls her hair and, holds her by the hair and drags her to the court. And she's scantily clad. She's not even properly clothed. And she's brought to the court, which is filled with men. And that was a time when women were not supposed to be there in the court. The king is there, the blind king, Dhritarashtra is there, Bhishma Pitama is there, Dronacharya is there, all these stalwarts are there. Her 5 husbands who were meant to protect her are there, and not one of them stands up for her. And that is when she turns to Lord Krishna for help, of course. So the humiliation that she goes through, her anger is justified. So yes, she curses Dhritarashtra and she curses the entire clan, and she says not one will survive. And throughout the story of the Mahabharata, we see that how she doesn't let her husbands forget the fact that she has been humiliated, and she keeps. But even if she had not, yes, she was instrumental in the war of Kurukshetra. But even if she had not done that, Pandavas had lost their kingdom. They would have fought to reclaim. And like I said, at the very beginning, the prophecy, what, at one point, Lord Krishna tells her, even Dronacharya tells her, that there's a prophecy when she's born that, she's going to change the course of history. And she's conscious of that fact. And Dronacharya tells her that the war is not because of you. Yes, you have helped to nudge it along, but you're not the reason for the war. You have nudged it in that direction. Yes, you've given it a gentle push, but it was anyways meant to happen. And also what Krishna tells her, when she's dying, the last scene, in fact, that's also very interesting because I have not read about this anywhere. The last scene when they are, ascending this mountain, and only the person who's the most virtuous would reach the top. So it is Yudhishthir because he was, known to be virtuous. And one by one, everyone collapses. And the first to collapse is, of course, Draupadi. And that's when she thinks of Krishna. And he tells her that, that first scene, remember when I read out the first scene that she stumbles out of the fire? As if she came out as an afterthought. The gods gave her as an afterthought. It was, the yagna was held for Drishtadyumna. Draupadi was not, her father had not prayed for her. He wanted a son. And she stumbles out of the fire. So it's like she was pushed out for a purpose, and that is what Krishna, kind of hints out towards the end that, why she was nudged against her wishes was because she was meant to change the course of history. So maybe it was predestined, it was meant to happen. And but yes, she can't be held solely responsible, or we can't say that she was the only reason or the primary reason. Yes, one of the reasons definitely for the war. Any other inputs or thoughts on the book? So, for those of you who haven't, I would again request you to read this book, because it's a very, I'm sure you won't regret, it's a very simple read, not very complex. And the events that have been narrated in a very brief, it's not a very detailed, it's not that a lot of information is given over there, in a very relatable, very engaging, and a very succinct manner. Each incident has been talked about. So, like I said, some incidences have been talked about in greater length, while some have been given lesser space. But yes, more or less, once you read this, you will become familiar with the story of the Mahabharata. Okay, so there's one more question from Anag. He says, does the book tell us about Ashwathama, the only man from the courtroom who tries to oppose the whole scene that was going on? The book does talk about the character of Ashwathama, but no, it doesn't talk about, whether he tried to oppose uh, the whole scene, the court scene. No, it doesn't talk about that. In fact, I had not heard about this as well. Or maybe it's just slipped from my mind. So the book, of course, doesn't mention this, but Ashwathama is mentioned towards the end of the book in the Battle of Kurukshetra. How, like he's part of the Kaurav army, and how Dronacharya is finally killed. So yes, that time. Aditya says, I don't think Ashwathama ever did that. So yeah, even I'm not very sure about that part. As far as I know, and I may be wrong, but not one person stood up in the court to help Draupadi. That's what I remember. And the only person, I mean, her husband didn't stand up. And I think Bhim, what it does say is that out of all the five men, it was Bhim who loved her the most, and who probably made an attempt to, stand up and stop what was happening. But Yudhishthir stops him, because, he was, they had lost all rights on Draupadi. So yeah, it does. The book does talk about that how Bhim, he does try to make an effort. So Abhika says Ashwathama stood up and left before she was brought in court. Okay, probably I'm not aware of this. Anag, he was the man who survived the war from the Kaurav's side only because he questioned the decision of Duryodhan. Who? Which man? Ashwathama? No, he doesn't survive. No, no, no. Ashwathama also dies in the war. Everybody, every single person from the Kaurav army, uh, they were wiped out. They were killed. He does survive? Okay, maybe. I'm not too sure. Okay, maybe Ashwathama does survive. So the reason is that because he questioned the decision of Duryodhan. Okay, probably then. I'm not very sure. But I do know that Dronacharya was, tricked into believing that Ashwathama is dead, and Ashwathama was the name of the elephant. And yeah, okay. So probably we'll have to, so again, we need to relook. There are so many stories and so much we remember and we don't remember about the Mahabharata. So yes, it does kind of make you go back and explore and research about these questions. So I hope that after this session, you will feel motivated to read the book and explore, because you should know about it. And it is part of our history, mythology, and it plays an important part in our culture. Yeah, so Anak, he says Ashwathama, no, but in front of Dronacharya, he doesn't say Ashwathama the elephant. He says Ashwathama is dead. And that is, when Dronacharya, he turns to Yudhishthir, because Yudhishthir never lied. He was an honest man. Like I said, he was the only virtuous man who reached that hill, at the top of the mountain. So he was known for not lying. He was known to be an honest man. And that is why Dronacharya turns to Yudhishthir that if he tells me Ashwathama is dead, I'll agree. And the only reason Yudhishthir says Ashwathama is dead because it was Ashwathama was the name of an elephant. So he doesn't specify Ashwathama, your son, or Ashwathama, the elephant, but he says Ashwathama is dead. So that is when Dronacharya kind of gives up and then he's tricked. Yeah. Ashwathama Kunjaraha Hataha from Sanskrit, literal translation to that. Okay, what does that mean? Ashwathama Kunjaraha Hataha. What does that translate into, Anak? It's good to know you know quite a bit about the epic, about the Mahabharata. The elephant has been injured. Okay. No, but in front of a lot of trickery happened in that battle, because had they followed the virtuous path, they would not have been able to defeat the Kauravas. So yes, but Karn was attacked when he was helpless. He had got off the wheel of his chariot had got stuck. And of course, his armor had been taken from him. That was also taken by trickery because they knew that he was known as Dan Veer Karn. He would never refuse anything. And this person, he goes to Karna and he asks for his kundal and his kavach. And also he had this curse that at the most crucial moment of his life, he will forget the mantra to call the astras to save him. But it was sundown, it was sunset, and he had got off his chariot. He was trying to take out the wheel of the chariot, and that is when Lord Krishna signals to Arjun to kill the helpless and the defenseless Karn. So there was sort of trickery in that battle. So what happened with Drona was they didn't specify. They just said Ashwathama. Probably he just heard Ashwathama. He didn't hear the elephant. Probably that could have been one thing. So when he hears Ashwathama, because if he would say Ashwathama the elephant, then he wouldn't be, disheartened. Exactly. So in the war, that is what in fact it says, when it's a war, even if you're fighting for a just cause, there is, a war always leaves a trail of destruction and devastation behind it. And in a war, yes, you're right, Aditya, nobody's actually righteous because it's like you want to win. You may begin on a righteous note. You may begin thinking that you will follow the right path. But in the end, it's, I think somewhere down the lane, all that virtue is lost. So yes, that's there. So any other inputs or thoughts? So I hope those of you who've not read the book, you feel motivated enough to read the book. And like I said, you won't regret, you will enjoy. I read it for the second time. The first time, like I said, I read it back in 2009 or 10. And I never underline anything in my book. I never use a pen or a pencil. This was the first book in which I actually underlined a lot of sentences because I found them so meaningful and so profound. So I underlined, that was not, in fact, that wasn't even my book. It was my sister-in-law's book and I underlined in her book. But now I've got my own copy and I read this book again and I found it as engaging. Of course, that element of that surprise element, that Draupadi's perspective and all, I already knew that. But still, I enjoyed reading about the events and the story again. So no matter how many times you read or, you read about this epic, it seems as engaging as ever. It's as interesting, as engaging as ever. So yeah, I think you will enjoy reading this book. So do we have any other questions or inputs or thoughts? Okay, then we can stop for the time being for this session and hope to see you again with another session on another book. Thank you, all of you.